Let's begin with the word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to come together and study your word. And thank you for what you've been teaching us about wisdom throughout your word. And I just pray that as we continue to study, that we'll find ways to become better followers of you. And Lord, I pray that our conversation and our thoughts and what we have to bring is glorifying and honoring you. In your name I pray. We've been talking about wisdom this whole summer quarter, and we started at Proverbs, went to the wisdom of the Gospels, and now we've been in James. And each lesson has taken a different aspect of wisdom and what wisdom is. And so before I dive in here today, this is our last lesson on wisdom. The title is Two Kinds of Wisdom. And as we read James 3 and also James 5, we're going to be looking at what godly wisdom yields or what it is, and what earthly wisdom yields or what it is. And so that's kind of where we're going with the lesson here today. But I'm just curious here, throughout the summer quarter, has there been anything that has stuck out to you about wisdom that you'd like to share?
I need a lot more of it.
You need a lot more of it. That's coming from a preacher.
It's because of the people I'm working with, wisdom.
I don't know how to take that.
Solomon was the wisest man ever lived, but he still goofed up.
Yeah. That puts things in perspective there, doesn't it? Yeah. Anything else? One of the things that I've been studying and reading is how wisdom is not something that just washes over you and you are infected with it and now you're good with it. I've been encouraged and challenged that wisdom is something that we work towards. It's something that we have to put intentional action toward. So many things in life. And I still remember I taught for 2 years with the former ag teacher at the school, and I just wish I could have like a USB cable that went from his brain to mine, with all the experiences and knowledge that he had, that I could just have that. And now, it's been 14 years ago. Throughout my experience and studying and all that, I feel that I may have gotten to that point. And I look at people coming out of college in these teacher programs and think, man, I wish I could impart my knowledge and experience onto you. And I see wisdom being that type of thing. Wisdom being this knowledge being put in action. There's an experience factor. There's a relationship factor that you have to build. And in our culture where we like things right away, instantly, and not have to put a whole lot of work into it, it's a challenge for me, and for me to continue to practice wisdom. It's just that. It's a practice. It's a relationship. It's a intentional action. So. All right, we're going to dive into our lesson here today. James 3, 13 to 18, and then James 5, 7 to 12 is where our lesson text comes from today. And so I'll read both of them, and then we'll go back and look and see what it has to say. So James 3, verse 13 says this: "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness." And then James 5, verse 7 to 12. "Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, or you will be condemned. All right, lots of good things in there for us to take a look at. So we'll start here in James 3, verse 13. This comes at the end of our lesson last week. And the lesson last week, when we looked at what James was starting to talk about right there, he was saying teachers, right? Chapter 3, verse 1. He starts, particularly in this instance, talking about teachers. And we talked about last week that, you know, there was honor in being a teacher. There were people that wanted to be teachers, and there was a term that I used for that, and I talked about influencers. And in our society today, over the last, 5 years or so, that term has become more and more used in our language. Anyone out here hear of an influencer? What's an influencer, Jesse? Or how is it being used in our society today?
Well, lately, I mean, one area is people who are just posting social media stuff all the time, and they have a certain amount of followers. And
right.
for whatever reason, people are following them, and so that's how I'm hearing it.
Yeah, that's how I'm hearing it too. The social media influencers, and people are making their careers and jobs and living off of being an influencer. And because they have the influence they have, businesses want to give them products and things and all that, and hopes. I mean, this is advertising, this is marketing, right? And so that's where I come from with that term influencer, and how I see chapter 3, what we studied last week, talking about. Commentators have said that, you know, chapter 3 is talking about teachers, but the things that are applied here to teachers are good for anyone who has influence. And last week we talked about who has influence. Do you think about all the influence you had this past week? People who are looking at you. What's the thing they say for people that are in a public setting that don't want to be role models? The encouragement is, you're a role model anyway. Even if you didn't want to do it, you're still a role model. Now I would say that for us too. We're influencers, even if we don't want to be, right? We're still influencers. And so that's where our 13, the last part of chapter 3 comes from, with that thought in mind, that influencer. All right. So it says in here, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. So James is saying here, if you're wise and understanding, and you want to be known as wise and understanding, then let it show it by your good life, right? By deeds done in humility. And humility comes with a couple different connotations here. This one, the word translated humility, carries much overlap in the meaning with the word gentleness. That's interesting. There are deeds done in gentleness that comes from wisdom. But it kind of talks about one of those lessons that we talked about with faith and deeds, right? So who is wise and understanding among you? Right? Don't just pay lip service to it. Pay action to it there as well. Let it show by good life. Deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. 14. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny it. All right? Harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts. James was talking to teachers here who wanted influence, who wanted to speak about what the gospel was and what Christ talked about here, but maybe not necessarily wanted to live it out. And Jesus encountered people like this as well when he was ministering, right? The Pharisees. That was the whole issue with the Pharisees. They wanted to teach the law and preach the law and have others follow the law, but they didn't want to follow it themselves. And so James is calling it out here. If you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Bitter envy and selfish ambition. Kind of the opposite of the godly wisdom that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Maybe we'll come back to that one right here.
So Ryan, obviously you shouldn't boast about that.
Yes.
But what's it mean I'm struck by, don't deny the truth.
Yeah.
Does that mean that if my heart is full of bitter envy and selfish ambition, that I'm just honest about that and say, hey, I'm feeling envious? Like, what does that truth thing mean? Or is that something different?
Yeah. Yeah, as I was looking at this, when it's saying, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, that you're not supposed to boast about. I don't know if that it is that, or if it connects back to this verse 13, the wise and understanding. So if you are, again, this goes back to being an influencer or a teacher. If I want to have influence and I want to have this honor and all that, and yet in my heart, I'm supposed to be preaching the gospel of Christ. And in my heart, I have other motives besides actually preaching the gospel of Christ. Right? Maybe I shouldn't be boasting about preaching the gospel of Christ, because the motives in my heart are going to come out in ways when people don't see it. And so I think James is saying here, if you harbor this envy, and this envy is jealousy of other people's skills. Right? So if I have this envy of other people and this selfish ambition that I want to be on top, maybe I shouldn't be boasting about the things that I'm teaching about. Or in denying the truth. That truth is what is actually in your heart. So I think about it in like a sports metaphor. Someone says that they're greatest, and they're boasting about it, and they're not. They're denying the truth that's in their heart, that they're not the best. And so that's kind of how I see it. That part. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, you're the teacher.
Well, I know I am, but I'm not the end-all, be-all. I'm curious to see what are you thinking more along the lines that denying the absolute truth that's in? Yeah.
I was wondering if this is pointing to confession. Like, hey, depending on what the subject is, what it is that we're supposed to be true about exactly.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm struggling with envy or selfish ambition, maybe I shouldn't deny it. Just say, hey, brothers and sisters, I'm struggling with envy and selfish ambition.
Right.
Please pray for me. Confession is part of growing and getting through it. That's what I was kind of wondering.
Yeah.
Is he saying, and don't pretend you're good. Just be honest with your shortcomings, and maybe that's how you can do it.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
There's no room for a two-faced life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't see how you can operate, or how you can even exist with it. You say one thing and do another.
Yeah, sure.
I think if we would learn as Christians to practice confession, we all would be so much better off. But it's our pride that prevents us from admitting our weaknesses. And, sin, if it's not dealt with, will not go away. It will continue to get greater. So I think there's a twofold message in that scripture.
Yeah.
So I take it that this is mostly talking to an individual, because, especially when I was looking at the idea of selfish ambition, how does another person truly know your ambition, whether it's selfish or not? You may get an idea, but really it's the individual themselves that really knows, and then that refers to the truth. Sometimes within ourselves we deny the truth, that we know better, but we kind of
And we studied that came in a lesson or two before, where it says deceiving yourselves. Right? We talked about deceiving ourselves, and yeah.
I go with what Robin said about confession. Here at our church, I think, just I think we'd be better off if we could do more good, if we would be willing to, how do I wanna say this? When you give an invitation for people to come, you know, an altar call or something, we're not going to give up because we're afraid of what people think.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm wrong. But I like what Robin said, you know, I think we all should learn to be more, what's the word I want to use? Expose ourselves
Vulnerable.
and
Yeah.
confess.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't do anything right.
Mhm.
But when we give an altar call or something, I think we look, maybe I'm guilty of look around too much to see who else is doing it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
If I do decide to do it, what am I gonna look like to that person?
Mhm.
Does he think I got false? You know what I mean? You know where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
And I like what Robin
Yeah.
said there. I think it's one way to make people feel at home that come into a church that don't even know Christ.
Mhm.
Make them want to have what you have. You're not gonna have anybody climb it up and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what you all are saying here comes up for us here in verse 17. So let's take a look at the verse 16 is saying where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every other evil practice. Right? So selfish ambition, evil. What's the result of that? Evil practice. But what we're saying here and what we want, let's look here at 17. It says that the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, and peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So let's take a look at, this is wisdom that comes from heaven. Again, this is a lesson about two types of wisdom, worldly wisdom and wisdom from God. So the wisdom that comes from heaven, knowing what we just talked about here of confession of sins and you know, what Wilmer was saying of, you know, maybe, well, it comes back to pride, right? I don't want to confess because of pride or whatever there. 17, verse 17, wisdom that comes from heaven is this. So this is for all of us influencers, right? So let's dive into this. It's first of all pure. What is pure? How do you describe to someone pure?
No hidden motives.
No hidden motives.
Not contaminated.
Not contaminated. What was the pure and spotless lamb that was talked about in the law?
Mhm.
What's that look like? Anyone have a pure and spotless lamb at home?
Without sin.
Without sin? Yeah.
Complete righteousness.
Complete righteousness. No defects, right? No faults. I oftentimes, and I have to watch what I say, you know, as a teacher and influencer, pure water does not conduct electricity. And I have to watch when I say that because I don't want any kid going home and thinking that they're going to get pure water and try this out. Because I would feel awful. And so I put that disclaimer. I said, don't do this. But pure water does not conduct electricity. Where do I get such pure water?
In the Catholic Church.
I don't know. In the Catholic Church. Very well could be. It very well could be. You know, and I think of pure water. Pure water doesn't conduct electricity, and from what I've been told, pure water has no taste. And so I talk about taste of water. Like I know what my grandparents' water tasted on the farm because I love that water. I don't like the water right. I like Fiji water. Anyone drink Fiji water? Probably not because it costs like $5 a bottle, but every once in a while I'm like, yeah, why not? It's good. It tastes good. I don't know what's in it. It is good. Right? But pure water has no contamination. There's no minerals. There's no whatever else that might be in it. And it won't conduct electricity. Pure. Wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. No defects, no faults, blameless, all the other things we talked about there, right? What about the next one? Peace-loving.
Well, it said in 16 that if you have envy and selfish ambition, it'll be disorder,
Right.
which is very, I don't know if it's opposite, but it's very different than peace.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Have you noticed this when someone is practicing a godly wisdom, the peace that comes from that? Has that been noticeable to you?
I'll have to say about my experience this week with God.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, last week we talked about the mask thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I really prayed about it. I did a lot of soul searching, so this is like a confession, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Christian people about it, and they said, well, if your leaders in your church are asking you to do it, even if you disagree with it, you need to do it. So I will confess that I will wear a mask, even though I don't agree with it. But God really convicted me of this week, as I searched I was at the beach for 3 days with my daughters, and I did some soul searching, and that's the conclusion I came to. I don't agree with it, but to be a peacemaker, I feel like I should wear it. And I've gotten, it's one I said last Sunday, I heard 2 compliments, and they agreed with me 100%. So I felt like what I said was not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, with myself now, I need to do what God's calling me to do. If you don't want to wear a mask in church, I do not look down on you because I agree with that. But for myself, I feel like the Lord convicted me to obey my leaders in my church, even though I don't agree with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a confession.
But then you also,
And it gave me peace then. When you talk about
Right.
peace,
Well, in the Christian wisdom, you said you sought out Christian
counseling.
counselors, right?
Yeah.
And so that I would say, well, I don't know, but would you say they showed Christian wisdom,
Oh,
godly
yeah.
wisdom?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a peace that comes from that, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's another section here that talks about peace, so we'll continue on with that here. How about considerate? What's considerate mean? Godly wisdom is considerate.
Thinking about the needs of others.
Thinking about the needs of others. Looking at multiple angles maybe, looking at someone's other viewpoint. That's one thing that I have been challenged with, over the summer of all the racial things that have gone on, of being considerate, looking at the viewpoint of others. Being considerate. How about submissive? What's submissive mean?
I think Arlene illustrated that well with what she's talking about. Hey, people have asked me to do this, but it's for everyone. We recognize that there are people who God has allowed to be in authority over us. Whether we're citizens under a government or students in a classroom or whatever. We will submit, of course, to God, but also there are people to whom we owe respect. And, Jesus talked about that, Paul talked about it. We owe respect, we owe honor, and so even if I don't like what you're doing, if you're not going against God, I'll submit to you, and that's just what wisdom calls for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The commentator here says submissive means something like willing to yield or open to reason. The next one is full of mercy. How do you describe mercy?
I always looked at mercy as the fact of forgiving someone even though they were due what was coming to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because you cannot have mercy if you've never been convicted.
Mm-hmm.
I look at somebody, somebody being pardoned or something like that.
Yeah.
That never happens until the person first has been guilty and convicted of something.
Mm-hmm. mercy, willing to give what is not deserved. Forgiveness. Yeah. Full of mercy. It says full of good fruit. Full of good fruit. Can you describe good fruit? I got a watermelon yesterday. That was good. I can't describe it to you, but I know a good watermelon when I have one. And I've had some really bad ones this season. This one was good.
Where'd you buy it?
Dutchway. The Dutchway has good seedless watermelon.
They
Or they did on Saturday. They did yesterday.
They also have some bad ones.
They'd have some bad
But you don't
Already
know,
full of mercy.
but you don't know it's good or bad till you cut it open.
ones. Well, you gotta hit it and it has to have the right sound, right? I don't know.
What's that sound like?
Yeah.
I kicked it.
All of that takes wisdom.
It does, doesn't it? Experience a little bit.
I like what you said there. Hit it. How'd you say that?
Hit it and hear what it sounds like.
Let's take that, let's take it for a personal.
Hit them and see what it hit.
Are you over stand up?
Oh, boy.
Good fruit. Good fruit. You think of just, you talk about good fruit of watermelon or grapes or apples or something like that, and just the joy it brings you and just the satisfaction. Good fruit here, right? Wisdom that comes from heaven is full of good fruit. And that good fruit comes from the fruit of the Spirit. Peace, love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, gentleness, faithfulness. I think I hit them all, but not in the regular.
Self-control.
There you go. Right? Good fruit. Good fruit. How about impartial? How do you define impartial? There's another word that we use a lot with that, and that's bias. That's also a big word as well, but impartial would be not to have a bias.
If you're a teacher, does that mean not to pick favorites?
It would. I think so, yeah. It's not easy to do.
How do you do that?
How do I do that?
Because I imagine when you have an ag class with 25 kids in it, there are some kids that you just like better than others, and some kids that you don't care for. How do you make sure that you don't have a teacher's pet, you don't have somebody who's left out? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's
Or don't you?
No, I try to. In the way that you talk with them, in the amount of time that you spend with them, I think that's part of how I do that. There are times when there's someone that just gets on your nerves, and it's getting on the nerves of everyone else as well. But you work with them. Let's see,
Go back, go back to the fruit thing, all right?
Well, yeah.
All fruit doesn't mature at the same time, is that what you tell yourself? This fruit right here in this seed has just not matured yet. He's still a bit sour. I'm gonna be patient at his time.
That's a good way of looking at it, because I know some of those rotten apples that became really good Christian leaders in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, very good. There's a lot of maturity that happens after the graduation date.
Oh, yeah.
And I just see myself as a seed planter or a fertilizer, and someone else can reap the harvest, so be it. And having that attitude of that, I think, is one way. There are steps I try to not show, if there's something, for example, I have half of my welding helmets are self-darkening and half of them aren't. What do the kids want? The easiest one. And so I have to be careful, not to allow some of those kids that have them all the time, I try to distribute. There's different things like that that can help show impartiality. Showing, how do you speak to them, showing good graces to kids that, have influence or whatever. I think those are the ways that I try to do it. I hope I'm impartial.
It's interesting to me how, thinking about true justice, impartiality, and mercy, how intertwined they all are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if for some reason I tend not to like something similar, which one would I be quickest to judge?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then you come back to the point of mercy. If I show mercy, this person done something, am I willing to show mercy when somebody else does it? Almost exactly the same thing.
Right.
How intertwined all of that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, isn't that something? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ryan, you talked about students turning around, later on, like Steve Wingfield was a really good example.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Sure.
He must have been.
Quite a trip, huh?
Yeah.
Well, how many people do you know who were total knuckleheads in high school? And then later in life, they were something different. And maybe you didn't see them for 20 years. And you said, oh, you've really changed. I mean, most of us were knuckleheads in high school. And it just, if you can be impartial and all that, then you can help to see that happen instead of just squashing somebody
Right.
down before they even have a chance.
Well, in that godly wisdom, worldly wisdom says this is how you were in high school. This is how you're going to be 20 years later, right? Godly wisdom says, well, let me judge you now. And God can work. And honestly, for myself, that's something I've been convicted, and it's a challenge for me. I talk about these knuckleheads that I've had in class that have become leaders in the Christian church, but there are people who I went to high school with that are on fire for Christ, but they weren't in high school. And I got to really watch myself, because I can get into that situation really quick now wait a minute here. What's your motive here? I knew you. And that's one of our lessons. We talked about Jesus not having any honor in his own hometown, right? And Jesus talks about that. And that's something that I talked about before that we have to really watch. That impartial. And the last one here is sincere. Sincere. How do you define sincerity or sincere? A lot of times if we think about it, it might be easier to think of the opposite. If someone is not sincere, what's that look like?
Now, there's hidden motives, there's a hidden agenda, there's things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not seeing the true person. You're seeing a facade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a word they can come up with. This is genuine. Someone who's sincere is genuine. I like what you said. They're putting on a facade. Are they truthful? Are they a hypocrite? Or are they truthful? Someone who is, So those things right there, right? This is what the wisdom that comes from heaven is. Pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but this is first to get started with. And this whole summer we've been talking about wisdom and what wisdom looks like. How do we gain wisdom and how did Jesus show wisdom? Think about that as when you're studying the stories of Jesus. Does Jesus follow all these things right here in his wisdom and how he reacted? Verse 18 there says, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. And this goes along here with this wisdom that comes from heaven. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. We see a lot of, in the Bible, in the Sermon on the Mount, talking about peacemaking. Blessed are the peacemakers. Let's move on here, for the sake of time, to chapter 5. Our last part of the lesson comes from chapter 5, verses 7 to 12. And to understand 7 and 12, you have to understand verses 1 through 6. And so I'll just go over real quick what 1 through 6 is saying. James is talking to the, in my Bible, the heading says rich oppressors. These would be landlords or people that have authority over others in a very authoritative way, kind of like a master-slave relationship there. And verses 1 through 6, the people that were this probably wouldn't be reading this letter. These would be non-Christian people here in this day that were oppressing the Jewish Christians at the time. but I think James includes this here so that the readers, the Jewish Christians who are being oppressed, can see what can happen. What can happen if you become wealthy and you don't have God. And so then we have here in verse 7. So the backdrop here is these Jewish Christians are being oppressed in some way or another, and James has some encouragement for them. The first one says, "Be patient, then, brothers, until the Lord's coming." All right, so we have two things here, being patient and the Lord is coming. James is writing to a group of believers who have cause to be angry and despondent. The phrase brothers and sisters indicates that James's words are not intended for the rich landlord unbelievers that we talked about there, but for Christians who suffer at their hands. So be patient, and the Lord is coming. For the early church, there wasn't too much hope for any change. Their ability to change things was very, very limited. In our society here, we have a lot more of control for change. And so James here writes that we need to be patient, for the Lord is coming. And that worked here for this early church, this hope of a long view, which looks to the return of Christ. And I don't know how that sets with you here and how that helps you when you're being oppressed. But, in all that we do, we should be taking this long view that Christ is returning. I told you before that in preparation for studying, I listened to Sunday school meditations, and the ending song, which is, I don't know if they came up with it or I haven't been able to find it anywhere, but the last part of the verse is, I will do God's work with eternity's values in view. And so that's one thing that's been encouraging to me. The stuff that I do, I do it with the eternity's values in view. And that's what James is saying here in verse 7. And he gives an analogy. The farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. Right? So the ag analogy here of planting something in the soil and waiting patiently until it comes up, waiting patiently for rains. Here in Israel, rains didn't really fall between May and October, and so you had the spring rains, you had the fall rains, and you patiently waited for them. Verse 8, "You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near." We have this being patient and standing firm. Being patient and standing firm. The counsel to stand firm or to be strengthened speaks to one's inner resolve. Christians must be resolute and courageous in earthly circumstances while awaiting the Lord's coming. Such resolve will involve rejecting the negative views of skeptics. Standing firm when you're being oppressed, standing firm in God's word and what He has to say, while being patient while you go through it. Then we have verse 9. "Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door." And this is a challenge to these Jewish Christians who are being oppressed. And they're frustrated because they're being oppressed. They're frustrated because of the injustice. And if you're frustrated about something and you can't take it out on the people that are causing it, who can you take it out on? Unless you're patient. You take it out with one another. And so James is possibly witnessing this oppression that's happening through the Jewish Christians and the grumbling and the frustration, the anger that they have with that. They're taking it out on each other. And James says, you can't do this. Don't grumble against each other or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. And him saying the judge is standing at the door is that this is going to come soon. If you continue to grumble against and be mad at each other, this judgment is going to be coming soon. Verse 10 and 11. James gives an example for these Jewish Christians of people who have been patient through oppression. And the two groups that James comes up here is the prophets of the Old Testament time, being patient through oppression, and Job, and Job's perseverance. And so both of these stories, both of these groups of folks, these Jewish Christians would have known. and would have studied and know inside and out, and know that through their patience and standing firm and belief in God, that things came out okay. And so I got thinking about this. Do we have any examples of patience in the face of suffering that we can look to today? Besides the stories that we have in the Bible. Modern day examples of patience through suffering. If I say Mother Teresa, does that fit the bill here?
How about the Christians who are being persecuted for their faith, you know, like over in the Middle East?
Mm-hmm. Have you been hearing stories about
Yeah, in fact,
patience and suffering there?
yeah, the radio this morning talking about how some bandits went in and destroyed the houses of Christians, and that was it. That's all they did, was just destroy their houses. How relief organizations are trying to come in now and rebuild their houses.
Mm-hmm.
I think of those people that were put in prison that President Trump helped to get out. Was it Andrew, whatever his name was, and several people that they suffered for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They've been patient during the time, but thank God we got out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. You were talking about that, when you said that, one thing that came to my mind was Nelson Mandela, who was in prison for a long time, got out, became a leader.
That one pastor that was held in Turkey, his last name is Bronson, I can't say what his first name is.
Okay.
And there's others too that.
Yeah, yeah.
I really like the verse, do not grumble against one another, and I take that's speaking to the church.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing that I have learned over the years and continue to practice is that not everyone's going to have the same conviction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, God may convict Robin in a certain area, but he may not convict my brothers and sisters in the same area. And so I'm not to grumble against someone that does not think exactly like I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the judge with a capital J. I'm not to judge my neighbors
Mm-hmm.
or my brothers and my sisters, especially my brothers and sisters. And I think, you know, it's so easy to go there. You know, when
Mhm.
God does a work on your heart and he convicts you of something, and you look around and not everyone's practicing the way you're practicing, or maybe not everyone's clapping in church and lifting their hands up, although you're excited about that. So easy to think, what's wrong with them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and to groan against them. We got a problem, and that is not from God.
Right.
You know, we need to love each other and pray for one another, encourage one another, and try to understand one another, where they're coming from, and talk about topics that are maybe hard to talk about,
Mhm.
and show love and show grace, and recognize that God will convict in the areas that he wants to convict, and maybe they're not being convicted in the same area you're being convicted of. It's really more about you and your attitude and teaching
Yeah.
us how to respond to that
Mhm.
versus them,
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
And that's something we can do with masks,
yeah,
you know, and with any other
sure.
rules that
Yeah,
are put
yeah.
in place by, quote unquote, those in authority over us.
Mhm. And I forget who it was that said it, but one of these lessons here, but made a point, and I was really thankful for that, is a lot of what James has to talk about here is us reflecting on ourselves and what we do with that.
Mhm.
And it's not my job to make sure, well, are your deeds following your faith? I think there are times that we can hold each other accountable, but a lot of what James has to talk about, and I agree with what you're saying there, is it's a reflection on us, self-reflecting. How are we practicing this godly wisdom, and how are we doing it, and what do we need to do to be better? Or we can ask people what do you see in my life that I can improve, and then I can improve on it. But a lot of what we have here is this inner part, this reflecting on what we do, and not necessarily always saying, well, I have it right and you don't, so what's wrong with you? Because that doesn't set well when you go up to something like that, does it?
They don't feel good.
It doesn't.
Inside.
Sure, right,
Have
right.
those thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone ever was raised in a house where you read from the Marge Mirror at all? Did you? Some? That's one thing. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an Anabaptist heritage thing there, and I don't do that with Audrey, so maybe I should. I don't know at some point. But when I taught the Anabaptist history class a couple years ago, I got really intrigued by some of the stories in that. But that would be patience through suffering or oppression.
I think today we see the exact opposite in what's happening. We have people that are wanting change that I sometimes, of course, disagree with, but they're not patient.
Mm-hmm.
They're not willing to persevere.
Mm-hmm.
They want to destroy what happened today. There's no patience. And I think in the past we've seen, and really when you think about Martin Luther King, he was working for change, but he never agreed with violence or,
Right.
and it's right around us.
Right.
The opposite.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring that up. In talking with some of my students of color and things, as we have discussions over the last number of years, one theme that comes up is, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but it made me think that, when they say patience, and you say patience, how long do I have to be patient for a change?
That's a good question.
And that doesn't, to me, that doesn't excuse a lot of the actions and all that, but it made me think, how long am I going to be patient for something? And as a Christian, how long am I supposed to be patient for something? And I think we won't like the answer, but I think it's a really long time. Or it could be.
Longer than our lifetime.
It could be longer than our lifetime. And how does that set with us when we want to see something and we have to be patient, and God's going to say, well, you have to be patient for 100 years. Well, I'm going to be dead in 100 years. What do you mean I got to be patient for that long? I always I like the story of these cathedrals that they built over in Europe that took hundreds of years to build. And people planted trees around the cathedral knowing that in 150 years they're going to need massive planks to finish off this cathedral. And so they planted these tree seedlings knowing that whatever generation down the road to finish this church, they're going to need the wood from this tree. I mean, that type of long-range thinking, for us Christians, we got to get in the right mindset for that, don't we? And I think that's what James is saying here. These Jewish Christians are being oppressed, and there's no end in sight until, what does James say, until the Lord comes. So church, we need to be patient until the Lord comes.
Yeah. Well, in Hebrews 11:39, Hebrews 11 talks about all the people of faith. And verse 39 says, they were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised.
Yeah.
So they kept persevering, they kept believing,
Right.
even though they didn't see it yet.
But as Christians, isn't that hard?
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, in this grouping, if that's hard, how does that work with people with racial injustice and social injustice? And if they don't have that long view in place, then they resort to something else, right? May we not resort to those types of things. I'm going to finish up here real quick. In conclusion, the verse 12, I think we've heard many times here of not swearing an oath. But in conclusion, with this wisdom, the solution is for Christians to seek wisdom that comes from heaven. When armed with it, we can put suffering into a larger perspective and be empowered with perseverance to endure until Jesus returns. And I really like that. If we want to seek wisdom from heaven, and we know what the end goal is, we can be perseverant with that. We all face challenges over the course of our lives. The real question is, how will we react when those times come? Will we pause to seek wisdom from above, or will we rely on earthly wisdom in our response? All this has a really real bearing on our spiritual well-being in this life. Continual rejection of God's wisdom has internal implications. As we heed James's call to seek wisdom from above, we will experience a harvest of righteousness.
Amen.
Thank you for your time.